Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting. Meeting of the Development Plan Panel. My name is Councillor John Garvani and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. And I'd like to welcome the Human Geography and Planning students who have come to see what we do on Development Plan Panel. Hopefully they'll find it an interesting meeting. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves, if we start from my left?
Good afternoon, I'm Catherine Holloway, Team Leader for Sites and Policies.
Good afternoon, Paul Bingham, Team Leader in Policy and Plans.
Caroline Harris, Principal Planner, Sites and Policies.
Janet Howery, Principal Planner, Policy and Plans.
Councillor Paul Ray, Huntston Riverside Ward and Chair of the South and West Plans Panel.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Councillor Javed Akhtar, London and Woodhouse Ward, Chair for North and East Plan Panel.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council and Executive Member for Economy, Transport and Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carville Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Jess Lennox. I'm the Exec Board Member for Housing and that takes in housing growth.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Councillor Alan Lamb, I represent the Wetherby Ward and I'm also the Leader of the Opposition on the Council.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Philip Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer.
Hello, I'm Martin Elliott, I'm Head of Strategic Planning.
Thanks everybody. Can the clerk run through the first 5 formal items on the agenda?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So, agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2, there are no items which would require the exclusion of the press and or the public. Under item number 3, there's no formal late items. Item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interests? Thank you. And agenda item number 5, apologies. So apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Finnegan and I believe we're just waiting for Councillor Hesselwood and I'll note apologies accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 6, which are the minutes of the last meeting from 17th of September. The pages 7 to 14 in your agenda pack. Anything on those minutes? Silence is acceptance. Okay, we shall move on then. On to item 7, Leeds Local Plan 2040 update, and that's page 15 onwards in the agenda. Are you taking this, Martin?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you, Chair. So this is a update on the Local Plan 2040, and members will recall that this is the second of 2 development plan documents that are being prepared by the Council, the first being the Local Plan Update, Your City, Your Neighbourhood, Your Climate. This paper sets out the main direction of travel on some of the key areas of Leeds Local Plan 2040 and some of the emerging themes that are coming out of the evidence base that we've been considering over the past few months. It is important to develop a robust evidence base for the plan, as this will be the basis upon which plan policies and options can be developed and will also be the basis upon which the plan is ultimately examined by an independent inspector. So to that end, a lot of work has gone on the evidence base and we'll provide a summary of that as I go through. A lot of consideration has also been given to key areas of concern that were raised by developers and local people during the previous plan examinations within the authority. So it is keen to understand and seek to address those so that people have an understanding of how those have been considered. Also, the Council is now in a different place in terms of its ability to use digital technology to support its evidence base. So there's been a significant amount of time spent in terms of providing a robust digital baseline of information, which will assist greatly when we actually come to do consultation work, but also down the line how we communicate potential change to the plan and deal with modifications to it. Because as members will know, it's quite a holistic group of policies and quite a holistic web of evidence. So if you change one bit of it, you often need to change other bits, and the digital basis on which we've developed will help that significantly. The intent is to go to public consultation next spring with draft policy options for all policy areas, but what I'm going to do is just provide a bit of a bridging update today on some of the key themes and key policy areas. Para 8 talks about the changed MPPF, and clearly that's going to have an impact on the local plan. That sets out the sort of the main changes and also clarifies where those changes are being considered as part of both LPU1 and LOP 2040. Para 9 of the report sets out the key drivers for growth. Last meeting, members were taken through the SHMA, so I won't redo that now. But it's important, I think, to stress that there is a significant amount of growth that the city will need to plan for, and that these growth drivers do fit with the government's mission around economic growth as a key means of driving improved outcomes in living standards, particularly for housing and also for jobs. And Para 12 sets out the main draft elements of the emerging vision and the objectives for the plan, which are important to set direction and priorities. So the remainder of the report, starting Para 14, goes through some of the key headlines, and I'll just take you through some of those now. So the first is around urban intensification and building on previously developed land. This is key because I think we're going to need a drive for greater densification to make the most of the developable sites and the deliverable sites that are put forward in the plan. That will need to be addressed through a range of policies, including those on design and on placemaking, and some of these are already coming forward through LPU 1. We're conscious that there was an awful lot of concern from local people last time round that we hadn't fully, or considered not to have fully, exhausted brownfield land supplies before we looked to greenfield land releases. So we've carried out quite a thorough urban capacity study, and some of the headline results of that are included within the report in Para 16, where we've got up to 100 potential sites coming forward. But it is important to reflect that that still won't be sufficient to deliver some of the quite high development numbers that we're looking at in this plan. So there probably will be a need for greenfield land release through LLP 2040. But at the same time, it's also not always possible in Leeds to identify all of the brownfield stocks that might arise throughout the plan period from day one. There's quite a lot of unexpected release of land, which we call windfall. So we'll retain that windfall allowance, I think, coming through the plan. And such sites will include those that are under-occupied for a particular use, but are quite hard to actually pin down at this stage. Paras 21 to 26 concern infrastructure and new development. Very aware that that's going to be a key factor within LLP 2040. In terms of transport, the plan's closely aligned with the Connecting Leeds strategy and the way that people move around the city, not just now, but how they're going to move over the next 10 to 15 years through some of the infrastructure and investments that the City Council are making. Focusing development in areas with existing access to public transport is going to be really important, but also an awareness of capital spending commitments, such as the potential for mass rapid transit, will also be important to the plan. So we do need to consider how the plan might align with mass rapid transit, but given that that's not a fixed commitment yet, we can't rely on mass rapid transit in terms of some of the allocations and some of the policies, because obviously that would put them at risk. In terms of meeting local needs for affordable housing, another key theme, Paras 27 to 32 set that out, and I think you heard a lot about the SHMA and what the SHMA is telling us at the last meeting. But I think to say as well that there's lots of work ongoing with key delivery partners within the city at the moment, and with Homes England and with the combined authority, through something called the Affordable Housing Growth Partnership, and that's something that's been taken to Executive Board a couple of years ago, and I think will be refreshed and taken to Executive Board next year as well. And that's just about It's not just a role for planning in terms of making the delivery of affordable housing easier and turning that lever on Section 106 contributions. There's a whole range of tools and techniques that we need to do to implement greater affordable homes across the district. I think we also need to acknowledge that delivery has been limited in the city centre over the past sort of 5 to 10 years. As the city centre has resurged in terms of housing delivery, it's proven difficult to get the necessary levels of affordable housing from that type. And I think that's really down to the type of development that's being proposed there and the difficulty that developers find in terms of providing affordable housing through a build-to-rent model, and also the significant amount of affordable housing that we've had within the city centre. So the plan will lean into both affordable student accommodation and consider the needs for that, but also the way in which we can understand how to actually get more affordable housing, maybe not within built-to-rent properties, but maybe close to those. I think it's also important to think about the city centre and the main urban area as not being the only opportunity to deliver affordable housing within the city. The SHMA sets out that every settlement across Leeds has a need for affordable housing, so there will be a need for this plan to understand how that can be delivered, and that's something that can work in its benefit, because greenfield land on the edge of settlements in the outer area, for example, often has a higher land value attached to it, so it will be easier to actually get more affordable housing through those sites, and that's something that the government in its National Planning Policy Framework draft recognise, because it does actually suggest that we should set a 50% minimum affordable housing from any green belt or grey belt release. On commercial development, in powers 33 to 37 of the report, we talk about the overall needs, and initial evidence suggests that we're looking at a minimum of 400 hectares of employment land and 550 square metres of office development for the next plan period. I think the difference this time round from the previous plan will be much more of a focus on choice and competition in different sectors, because there will be a range of different sites that are required by the market to deliver that commercial floor space, from logistics right the way through to manufacturing and quite high level employment sectors which may want more of an urban or city centre or town centre quite destination. At the same time, I think it's really important for the plan, and we've acknowledged that we need to retain existing employment areas near to where people live. So what we'll see as we develop the evidence and the sites is there'll often be this potential tension between need for housing and need for employment, but we do need to make sure that where we've got existing employment in sustainable locations that's very well served by public transport and enables people to work locally without having to travel too far, that we seek to retain that employment, particularly where it's quality. The spatial distribution of development is another major theme coming through, and that's discussed in powers 38 to 43. That's about the right sort of development in the right place, and different to the way that we've handled this through previous plans. We've very much implemented a complete, compact and connected approach. Now that was established through policies in Local Plan Update 1, and if you recall, that's around how many facilities you can reach within a 10-minute walk from your home. The aspiration to use the CCC approach as a starting point to site assessment is very much at the heart and centre of Leeds Local Plan 2040. But as we investigate and we look through the potential sites, it's clear to us that not all new sites are going to be able to meet those 10-minute thresholds for CCC. So we are going to have to make some choices around how we deliver to meet particular needs, where those needs are met, bearing in mind there's a need for affordable housing right the way across the city, but how we also make sure that whilst we not be able to meet all of those services within a 10-minute walk, that we are meeting those key services within a 10-minute walk. But I'll talk a little bit more about also how the site assessment approach can actually help in terms of improving some of that connectivity as well later on. Moving on, Leeds transformational regeneration, I think, is going to be a very key focus of the plan. And at the moment, officers are working with regeneration colleagues to look at visioning documents for 6 neighbourhoods across the city centre and the fringe. as part of the intent to deliver over 20,000 new homes within the city centre. The plan will need to be aware of this level of housing, but because this level of housing will need quite a significant amount of investment and capital infrastructure investment, probably from government, it will need to be very careful, and there'll need to be a balance so that we're not actually committing all of our, or most of our housing needs to the city centre and fringe area. But we're making sure that we've identified those sites that are going to be deliverable through the plan period. So the city centre and its significant growth around the transformational regeneration may need to be considered as more of a stretch target for the local plan in due course. The green belt we discuss on paras 47 to 51, and that sets out that a wider strategic assessment of the green belt is being carried out. That's focused on 300 strategic parcels of land that are being defined by strong defensible boundaries measured against the 5 greenbelt purposes. And then in due course, having assessed the strategic parcels and their contribution to greenbelt purposes, then we can look to assess the contribution that sites make within those parcels. This evidence-based work will also help us to identify the government's grey belt definition, which is land which is not fulfilling those purposes and which also may be partly previously developed in nature. And finally, site assessments in paras 52 to 56. These have been carried out now on the sites that have been submitted to us and from the urban capacity study, and we're reconciling the information from those site assessments at the moment. The way that they'll be used in the consultation next year is as a sequentially preferable list of sites against a set of criteria. So at the next consultation stage, people can comment on the site and they can provide their views about whether that site should be further up that list of sequential preference or further down that list of sequential preference. But importantly, it will also give developers and proposers of those sites the opportunity to say, well, I can see that this is further down the list, but actually if I amend what I'm proposing, either by looking at how I can provide more infrastructure, more connection as part of the complete, compact and connected approach, or if I can reduce the scale of the site and maybe avoid particular parts of the site that are giving me a poorer score, how does that then get rescored? So all of that proposed emerging strategy therefore starts to look quite different, I think, from the existing core strategy in a number of key ways. That more specific focus on the city centre and the fringe to develop new neighbourhoods, the identification of sort of key corridors and hubs supported by a complete, compact and connected approach, but also aligns to the connecting lead strategy and potential for transport infrastructure improvements. The wider spread of new homes across all settlements to meet specific local needs, especially for affordable housing. Acknowledgement and planning for, but not over-reliance on mass transit. A likely need for greenfield development, as there are unlikely to be sufficient previously developed sites to meet all of our needs. A greater density of housing provision guided by design and placemaking. And finally, sort of less reliance on the private car for moving around. So hopefully all of that gives you an understanding of where we are in terms of our thinking, in terms of some of the initial outputs of the evidence base. There will be more detail on all of this. We're going to consider some of that information in the workshop that follows this meeting, but more detail will be provided in sort of January, preparing for the finalised consultation material in the spring next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Up to councillors. Councillor Ray.
Thank you for that, Martin, and obviously I appreciate we're going to go into significantly more detail specifically in these areas. One thing I do want to home in on, and I know I've said this in previous meetings, is around our definition of walkability to an area, which for someone, say, you know, slowly getting towards 40, probably not as mobile as I used to be, but 10 minutes walking for me is very different for 10 minutes walking for someone with a mobility issue. And when we're looking to assess these policies and assess the suitability of an area and its connected transport network, when we do go into that detailed work, are we actually going to review what we mean by walkable? Because actually, as we're an ageing population with more health complaints, more complex health needs, what might be very accessible to a 20-year-old is not necessarily very accessible to an 80-year-old. And actually, how are we going to square that circle? Because I would imagine developers will concentrate on the 20-year-old rather than necessarily the 80-year-old, because that then changes the dynamic of the conversation of the accessibility of the land, the sustainability of the land, and also the policies we will apply in terms of our Section 106 agreements and other planning conditions.
So we've taken that into consideration, Councillor, from the off, and that 10-minute is an average 10-minute walk, so it does account for a broad range of abilities. But I think also as part of sort of placemaking and understanding how people relate to and move around their place, as part of active travel, there are a range of other things that we need to consider, such as putting more benches in between key routes and new homes and services. So the plan will be alert to those issues.
Councillor Carlill.
Thank you. It was around the transport point, really, that we go into in some depth. And there's two sort of slightly differently worded points in this that I think it's useful for us to look at. So one is focusing development on areas where there is improvements to transport infrastructure expected. There's then point 22 in the report where it says focus investment in areas where existing transport could be improved, and they're two markedly different things, shall we say. The mass transit's one point of it. Yes, there are 2 lines that are going out for consultation at the moment. We've seen some of the benefits of that. So the our neighbouring authority Bradford has just announced that it wouldn't need the South Bradford link road that they'd originally proposed if mass transit comes through, because that will then be the driver for economic growth in some of their areas. How do we ensure that the latter, the focused investment in areas where existing transport could be improved, leads on that and we join the dots, rather than we end up building loads of houses where investment is already planned to go? Because were we talking to WICA at the moment around their transport strategy, their transport plan that they're putting together, they'd say, well, we need to know where you want houses and we'll design our transport plan. Very much so, I'm guessing you would like to say, well, we need to know where your transport's going and we'll put our houses there. But I very much feel the former should be the way we're planning it. Here's where the houses are going, or here's where transport could be improved, and we've talked about many areas where transport could be improved previously. How are we going to ensure that that transport comes forward to enable us to unlock that land, I guess, is the main question for that.
So I think it is both. So it will be existing and potential. But I think it's about maybe focusing not so much on the line, but on the hubs and the nodes between that line. So it's around, well, what are those hubs or centres that have the potential to be transport interchanges, not just through mass transit, but potentially through other modes of transport as well, where there also happens to be available land to put new housing and new development.
Sorry, just to add to Martin's comment, Councillor, I think the site assessment process as well will enable us to be able to look at sites through that sort of screening process, and also it would enable us to compare sites as well if we're undertaking the same assessment of all of the sites, and it gives you a pool. And then we will be doing the work on a sustainability appraisal as well, which then enables you to be able to get the optimum number of sites in the best locations. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I just want to ensure that, obviously, so you could look at my ward and say very close to that you will have a mass transit line, and you also have a 10-minute bus service that takes you into Bradford. That means that all of my green belt you could deliver houses on sustainably immediately. However, colleagues across in Wetherby would say, well, they don't have a good bus service already. If we delivered housing in useful places on the way to Wetherby, Wetherby could have a 10-minute bus service to Leeds at high speed. And it's around making sure that that is the option we're choosing, rather than, I probably wouldn't have a 10-minute bus service that you could get on if everyone suddenly lived on the corridor between Leeds and Bradford, because there'd be no more room on the bus. So it's making sure that we're focusing on that area where transport could be improved and where that small amount of investment could make a huge difference, that I'd really like to see that focus. Most people are telling me their bus service isn't good enough. I live on one of the only corridors where you could say, actually, my bus service is perfectly good enough. It is every 7 minutes and I can get on a bus at any time I want if I'm going to the city centre. But there are many colleagues who won't say the same about their wards, or many areas of my ward that won't say the same. So I just want to make sure it's focused there rather than just overpopulating areas where transport service is good enough.
Councillor Anderson.
Just 2 quick points. Sorry, just 2 quick points. One, on page 15, subparagraph A, 5th sentence. Can you just clarify exactly what you mean by that? I know how I would like to interpret it, but that doesn't mean to say that that's the correct interpretation of it. And secondly, on paragraph 10, how are you going to deal with conflicts of use? So you've got a piece of land. Now, it could be used for housing, could be used for transport, could be used for agriculture, and various other, green space, etc. How are you measuring what's the best use for a piece of land?
Thanks, Councillor. So the sentence I think you're pointing to is, government tells us that our focus should not be on whether we meet our housing needs, but on how.
It should be noted that the council will not need to allocate all of its land requirements and can rely on sites already given planning permission and allocated but not yet developed, which is the one we've argued for long enough that once a planning application has been granted, we should be able to count it. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, so we have quite a lot of permissions and existing allocations in the bank already. So we would be able to count those against our future plan period housing target.
That's clear.
Yeah.
Our developers might not necessarily agree, but...
Yeah. Provided, sorry, I should add, provided they meet the tests of being deliverable. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about paragraph 10?
So I understand exactly where you're coming from on this, and I think so does government, because government have committed to publish a land use framework for the last sort of 18 months, where I think recognising that there was one part of government, DEFRA, that was launching a 25-year agricultural plan, and there was another part of government, MHCLG, that was looking to set housing targets, and another part of government that was looking to increase renewable energy capacity. All of these things do occasionally conflict in terms of where the best place to deliver these things is. Looking at the evidence that we have for things like renewable energy through Leeds Local Plan Update 1, understanding the needs of housing, I don't necessarily see there's much conflict between being able to meet our needs for renewable energy within the city and deliver sufficient housing, particularly as we're looking to intensify, as I said in the presentation, intensify and get the best out of sites through densification. In terms of other conflicts with other land uses, we would still, through site assessment, need to have an understanding of where the best and most versatile agricultural land was, and seek to avoid building on that. So I don't know whether you're thinking of any other potential conflicts.
The one I was thinking of was with the government having now GB Energy, the council will need to come up, in my opinion, with an energy plan for the city as to where they see growth coming, where they see the various alternatives for sustainable energy being placed, and as a result of that, that could not exactly blight some parts of the city, but what it means is that that's where the best place, hills, good place to put windmills, that type of thing, which fine, sounds okay, but there are implications behind that. Not that this government's going to do so, but say, small nuclear areas in order to sustain the energy from those people. So it's that type of thing.
So I think the key point there is that there's kind of a wide basket of energy solutions that can be made available, right from sort of micro generation within new housing, all the way up to sort of capacity that's for a city or a city region. Certainly the work that was done through Local Plan Update 1 on renewable energy and renewable energy potential, there was nothing coming out of that suggested that we'd be running out of land and that we'd be carpeting the district in wind turbines or solar panels. That certainly wasn't what that evidence base was suggesting. In terms of wider installed capacity, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have been given the responsibility to look at energy action plans. So the City Council's plugged into that. Again, I'm not seeing, other than the things that I've mentioned, a massive role for Leeds in terms of its land, because certainly we don't have an awful lot of uplands, and whilst we may have some solar farms within the city as we do currently, I'm not necessarily seeing Leeds as being the sort of the main national generator of solar energy. There's also the issue around being able to plug into the grid. So I think that's an issue that nationally needs to be sorted out before the sort of the Leeds and the city region can realise its full energy potential.
Because yesterday I think the government said they need about 640 so many miles of new cabling was going to be required. Now the debate is that underground or is it overground? That's where the political debate needs to take place. Now, one can be solved easier than the other because if you suddenly put them under the ground, you're effectively blighting where the electricity is going over the top of.
I suppose just to say that once the plan sets its spatial strategy and understands the allocations and the numbers of homes in development that's going to come forward, there's clearly then a discussion to be had with energy providers, with the combined authority in terms of the local energy action plan, to say, well, what's the increase in demand likely to be, and how much of that increase in demand is it possible for us to accommodate either within those properties, which is why we've got policies in the plan to reduce the amount of energy that a new home brings. So efforts are there to sort of match those two things, Councillor.
Well, I did have Councillor Akhtar, but he's just popped out to take a call, I think. So, Councillor Lamb, and then you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. 2 points. First of all, I think what makes Leeds a great city is also what gives us the biggest challenge in this. And I think we are unique in the country, unless someone tells me otherwise, in our administrative area being made up of the city centre and then its unique and distinct satellite towns and villages. And the challenge of delivering a local plan for the whole administrative area is trying to make the policies fit everywhere. And you've described in the paper and introduction that it doesn't work. We have that problem now with the accessibility standard is one such area where large swathes of the city will never meet the core strategy accessibility standards, and then we have to hold our nose for every planning application that's considered. And I'm wondering if we're in danger of doing the same again here, particularly around the 10-minute cities where we are knowingly writing policies that we know do not apply and can't work in huge parts of the city. And as soon as you start saying, well, there's some policies we're just going to have to strategically ignore every time, then lots of other policies that we never intended to be ignored also start being ignored. And it feels to me we need to try and find a way to address that and almost plan settlement by settlement, because a lot of this stuff works beautifully inside the ring road, and as soon as you get out to Otley, Adul, Calverley, Wetherby, places like that, it starts to not work in the same way. So that's point one about how we address that. And the second point, it's coming back to Councillor Carlill's point about transport. I've probably got a slightly different view. He's identified the issue very well, that it's a bit chicken and egg. Do you, if you're in somewhere like Wetherby, the only way realistically you're going to get access to better public transport and mass transit is to have a significant growth in housing numbers. And I'm not sure that's what those settlements and communities want their elected representatives to be championing. They'd like the public transport, but not the housing growth that needs to go with it. And my personal view is it's about infrastructure first, and the concern around this plan is that we're out of kilter with the process of mass transit. And whatever your view on where the housing should go, it seems a no-brainer to me that those two things should be getting planned hand in hand. That if you've got, we know mass transit is coming, there's no indication that is not going to not be delivered now. So using those corridors and hubs and spokes, easy access to mass transit, along with the city centre, seems to me to be where the bulk of housing growth, employment, land, etc. should be. And the third and final point is just being really careful we don't repeat our mistakes of the past and treating our big city area as sort of in isolation and assuming that everyone that works here will want to live here and vice versa, and making sure we're plugged in to the fact we don't live in silos with hard borders, and that we factor that in, that some of the growth in employment will come from people who don't live in the city.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. You've kind of just summarised the three biggest challenges that we have when we make a local plan. So I'll just to really clear that the local plan can and will be spatially reflective of local places, and the evidence base that we're building up helps us to do that, because it provides a consistent approach to looking at complete, compact and connected communities, and it reflects that not all the communities are going to be the same in terms of their access to the 9 or 10 most important services. So I think that's a real positive step forward in terms of understanding the balance that then will need to be struck in terms of how much and where new development should go in light of that information. So I think what that will then do is that will lean into a need to understand what the impact of new development on settlements is and the performance of settlements across the city. And at the moment we divide settlements in terms of major settlements, in terms of smaller settlements, in terms of villages, and work is underway to look at that categorisation through looking at the outputs of the CCC work evidence that we've got. So I'd say it certainly doesn't ignore, we're not ignoring that's a fundamental baseline. There's an aspiration for the city to be within new development to be within 10 minutes, but given the need to meet other policy objectives, we might not always be able to do that. But it's still useful to have that aspiration within the plan, I would suggest.
Just on that specific point, isn't there a danger, though, that will become the developer's argument to build more houses in small settlements? Because the reason we need more houses is because they don't have, they're not within 10 minutes. Therefore, they need to get much bigger so that the services can be justified. And actually, it's not a realistic premise, because how much bigger they would have to get to justify the services is enormous. And we've got an awful lot of unique settlements like that that will never be within 10 minutes of all of the services.
I think it's rather about understanding why you would want to build in a smaller settlement, and what the local bottom-up reasons for that would be, particularly around the need for affordable housing and different types of housing that don't currently exist in that settlement, and then considering the sustainability of doing that by reference to the complete, compact and connected evidence base. At the moment, the way that officers are approaching site assessment isn't to be driven by the CCC, at the expense of anything else. It's part of a holistic assessment. I don't know whether anybody wants to come in on that particular point, because others have been doing a lot more detailed work on this than I have. Is that just so? Does that cover it? Okay.
No, yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a starting point. I think certainly the way we're using the CCC is looking at, well, what we can sort of break that down as well, because we know, you know, what services and facilities are there in different places as well, and is that, you know, why has it got that score? Is it because it's just got a shop, or has it got a school and a doctor's? You know, we can break that down and look at what services and facilities are in a place. And I think Martin's right. It's about the balance between the two, isn't it? It's about thinking, well, yeah, what were the local needs, and what are the service and facilities there, and what, you know, where does that balance lie between in sustainability terms overall? You know, because I think clearly if you could plan for all development to meet all needs in places that are CCC, you know, you can get everything in 10 minutes. That would be great. That would be what we like to do as a starting point. If we can't do that, I think we've got the evidence there to enable us to start thinking, well, what are the choices that we need to make here, and where are the tensions, and what are the pros and cons of different approaches, I guess, and what, you know, if you were to bring this place up to a CCC, what would you need to deliver, and is that viable? You know, what volume of development would you need, and would that be appropriate for this place given its character? So I think it's a balance, isn't it? And I think we've got the evidence that we can use to start making those decisions as part of the sort of holistic approach to site assessment.
So just on your other two questions, Councillor Lamb, there's never a right time to do a local plan, because nothing ever aligns to make it perfect. You can't stop everything. But I want to just be really clear that Mass Rapid Transit is likely to start building. I think the Mayor's committed to late 2020s, but it will build through into the early 2030s. Now, the plan and our commitment for a local plan needs to be reviewed every 5 years. So we'll need to do that throughout the process of Mass Rapid Transit coming online. Clearly, once we know what the chosen corridors are, and once we know what the certainty around a Transport and Works Act order, and whether or not actually there's going to be funding for Mass Rapid Transit, it'll be much easier for us to feed that into the plan. But for now, I think we need to understand, are the potential routes that are identified for Mass Rapid Transit in Leeds routes that, by their very nature, in terms of their hubs and their particular transport nodes, would otherwise lend themselves to development, sustainable development that can take advantage of existing transport, but actually will that then become even more sustainable once Mass Rapid Transit is in place? So the point here is, we wouldn't wish to allocate land at the end of a line in the middle of nowhere on a promise that mass transit was going to come and connect to it. But it'd be perfectly appropriate for us to identify land within the main urban area and within particular corridors where there are other options for transit, so that should Mass Rapid Transit not materialise, those hubs still have a purpose. And an example there would be examining the relationship between the city centre, Ellen Road and White Rose Office Park and the White Rose Retail Park. These hubs aren't going anywhere. There's already public transport connecting them, but certainly if Mass Rapid Transit comes, it provides much more potential for more economic growth and development within that area. So the plan just needs to play a balance, really, in terms of not relying totally on something that it doesn't yet know, but also being able to understand, well, what does that potential mean in particular parts of the city? Does that answer your question? Okay. And I think just you mentioned something about the need to understand the dynamics of the city and how people would sort of live in the city and work elsewhere, and commute into the city. We've got a lot of information through the Connecting Leeds strategy about how people work in the city and how they move about, but also our inclusive growth strategy tells us a lot about the particular sectors and the likely sectoral growth that we need to foster and facilitate. So those two pieces of existing policy will sort of help us sort of deal with that, so that we're looking at a holistic picture.
Thanks. Councillor Hesselwood.
Yeah, it's a comment rather than a question. Is that okay? Yeah. It was just on paragraph 20, where it talks about the city centre. And I'm just wanted to say thank you for making sure that that was included. Paragraph 20B, where we talk about the student housing. And we've talked for quite a long time, and going back when I was Councillor Lennox support member, we talked about affordable student housing in the city centre and how, you know, although we have some great student accommodation in the city centre, it is quite expensive and it is excluding some people from attending university. So I'm really pleased to see that we've got paragraph B in there, which says that we will explore means of remedying that and looking at the type, location, mix, that kind of thing, and the affordability of that. And also 20A, which, you know, we've acknowledged there that we do need more 3-bedroom and other family other properties that can be occupied by families in the city centre. You know, all over the world we have large cities that families live in the middle of, and in Leeds we seem to build 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, which, you know, we know why that's happened, but I'm just glad to see that we've acknowledged that, and that we have sort of committed to looking at building those more family orientated properties where families can move into the centre and have that same accessibility as, you know, younger people and single people can have with the mix that we have now. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's. I think there's certainly, this plan has an ambition to sort of understand the city centre and the residents within it as a more diverse group of people than simply looking at sort of young professionals and students.
Councillor Campbell.
The comment about students has just stung me into action. I think I need to make it clear. I think we need homes that everybody can afford. And I think picking out particular groups is perhaps a mistake. Now, certainly the purpose-built student accommodation that we see these days is, I think, to us who are looking at it from the outside, it seems expensive. And it does seem to me that there should be, perhaps as far as we're able to manage the market, which I don't think we are too well, we should be able to try and influence the provision of purpose-built quality student accommodation, which is at a price that it makes it more affordable for a wider range of people. I would quite specifically say that the only suggestion we've had to do that is to reduce the quality. And I think that's the wrong approach, personally. And if we're talking about that in 20B, I couldn't support reducing the quality of accommodation to reduce the price. Sorry about that. You know, student flats are bit of my hobby horse though. Just 3 general points in relation to various areas. Housing. You remember last time, and I still haven't got it clear in my mind, we talked about the affordables within the plan. You know, what's our priority? You know, what will be the percentage, etc., etc. And I asked last time, and I continue to ask, how can we guarantee, is there a mechanism we can put within the local plan that allows us to insist that developers come along and meet the target for that particular area. Yeah. There was an issue this week, wasn't there? Sorry, last week, in relation to that. We see on a regular basis that affordables disappear when developers decide that it's too expensive. They're the ones to go first. Everything, the rest they can do, but they can't do that. And so it seems to me that if we are talking and we're really serious about this, then we ought to be able to produce some mechanism which guarantees that we will the plan actually will provide those affordable units as parts of development. And I'm interested in the point in relation to being able to count existing planning permissions that are deliverable. And I'm just wondering if the government have come up with a definition of what is deliverable, because we're sitting on quite a lot of applications that don't seem to have progressed noticeably over the last 5-10 years. And so I suppose the question is, will the government give us permission not just to set a start date for a development, but a completion date, which would solve that particular problem, in my opinion. I think the issue of accessibility via public transport is one that actually, in my opinion, appears to be getting worse, because I don't know what it's been like in Wetherby, but effectively now, nothing that you built in Otley would meet our old accessibility criteria, because the bus network just slowly and inexorably is disappearing. And first, make no secret of the fact, and it may well be to do with the fact that the Mayor's talking about taking it back into public ownership, but make no secret of the fact that, you know, we're lucky to get the 2 buses an hour we do get, but they ain't going to guarantee that. And it may well be next year they're coming along and say, well, actually, it's 1 every 2 hours. And so the role of the Mayor and her ability to effectively influence and fund the public transport is vital. And I take the point about the mass transit corridors. I think we all appreciate that they will be a driver for growth. But they don't cover much of the city, and they don't cover much of West Yorkshire, if I'm honest. Though if you look at the Mayor's map, I think Wetherby and Otley are connected to the system at some distant date in the future. Let's be brutally honest, I'd probably never see it. And so I think we need some sort of coordination stroke commitment from WICA and particularly the Mayor in relation to how we then create a public transport network which serves, well, not just the communities we have, but if we don't have, those communities we have don't have service, then we can't expect them to expand. And I think there's a discussion to be had there in relation to that particular issue. Barry's comment around energy jogged my memory, because I think there's currently a government grant knocking about for local heat networks, because actually a group in Otley have contacted me about it, which is in effect you use surplus heat from a development somewhere to heat a small number of houses, a bit like the incinerator but on a much smaller scale. And again, the comment about where do you put the power cables? Do you put them above ground or below? And that goes back to how you design developments, in my opinion. And I think we've always missed a trick in designing developments, in that we should include within that development design the infrastructure, i.e. the gas, the electricity, the phone cables or whatever we use these days. We should include that within the design. At the moment we don't do that, it's an add-on. You know, they come along, they dig up the road, they put the cable in and away you go. It would seem to me that the opportunity is now here with these localised heating schemes, with localised power, etc., to build the development around that source. And I think that will be a useful thing for us to look at as well.
A few bits there for you, Martin, to pick up on.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. So just going back to the point you make on affordable housing, I think this is something that we've been sort of debating with developers for some time now in terms of viability. And the way that the government want you to make a plan is they want you to set what they call a strategic viability of that plan. Are all these policies viable day one of the plan? But then when it comes to site-by-site viability, and things happen from the point of adoption onwards, and what we've found is from the point of adoption of the core strategy, we've had various macroeconomic crises in the country that have hit developer viability quite hard. So how do we square making sure that our policies are viable throughout the 18-year plan period, so that we've got the certainty that we're going to deliver some of this stuff? Now, I think the way to do that is to be a bit more flexible in terms of the policies that we use, so not simply relying on delivery of affordable housing on site or commuted sum, but look at alternative ways of bringing that affordable housing in, maybe through the gift of land, or through looking at different partnerships, because the registered providers are in a very different place in terms of their investment models now to what they were back when we did the core strategy. So all of these things are being explored through the Affordable Housing Partnership Working Group meetings at the moment, and grant funding from Homes England is a key element of that as well. But we're still going to have this issue around developer viability. And I think that's something that we're also starting to talk to developers quite early on about, well, how do we make sure that this policy that is hard won is delivered throughout the plan period. In terms of deliverability of sites, and you asked whether there was a definition. There is a definition, and we work to a definition within the National Planning Practice guidance. So we have to show, and we do that through our annual strategic housing land availability assessment work that sets out whether a site is deliverable. In terms of accessibility by public transport and the role of buses, I agree with you, because buses are a key part of our transport mix within the city, and we've started conversations and dialogue with West Yorkshire Combined Authority in terms of their bus franchising, and what we will need to do is understand what our proposed options in terms of development and location and growth means for bus investment, and also what the potential is to get commuted sums and use community infrastructure levy to improve wider public transport and active travel investment within the city, because it's not just about one type of transport, it's all of it. And in terms of energy, that's definitely something that I think is something we should lean into in terms of the design code. So looking at how heat networks and how utilities are well designed from the off into new development, I think is very important, and I'll pick that up with colleagues who are looking at the design code. But in terms of the local heat networks, I don't know the details on that, but I do know that colleagues elsewhere in the council are looking at sort of applying for that grant and looking at various sort of local heat network schemes, and we can certainly bring that back when we come back in the next time to give you some clarity as to where that is.
Thank you for that, particularly about the heat networks, because as I said, I was approached by a group locally who are interested in actually promoting one of these. But the thing that struck me when they talked about it was we'd end up having to dig up quite a lot of road. And it would be better if we had the space in the development before, so we didn't have to do the digging.
Can I just pick up on the 42,000 homes that have got permissions but not yet developed? Are all those 42,000, are they past that assessment of being developable?
I think so. Yes. Yes. Matthew Brooke, who monitors the housing land supply, and that's his number, is nodding his head. So yes, because those would form part of our 5-year housing land supply.
Right, thank you. Okay, Councillor Ray.
Thank you. Just to pick up on the heat zone points, I mean, there's quite a large one that's been scoped out for pretty much a significant chunk of my ward in the city centre, and I think there's a valid point about new developments, but I actually think a lot of the aspiration is to connect existing developments, and I think that's perhaps why it's probably sitting with the climate and energy team there, but I think it is a valid point about what those junctions in. The 2 points I was going to raise, first of all, well, 3 points. First of all, comment, and I think just to echo what Councillor Hesselwood has said, that more specific focus on the granular understanding of the city centre is obviously important because it's different, and it's good to see that thinking's starting to come through. But very specifically, obviously, you're talking through your report around the surrounding neighbours and the neighbours within the city centre, and as much obviously the expansion of the city centre is to be welcomed to a certain extent. I suppose the question is how we're going to make sure that the city centre expands in such a way as it doesn't encroach on pre-existing communities in a way that allows for development of the city economically, but doesn't start to hit into cohesion of different neighbourhoods around the city centre that already exist, that have sometimes seen the city centre expansion as slightly hostile. And even with the expansion of the city centre as a secondary point, we've talked a lot about the hubs and the spokes of the transport network and the development around that. A lot of the communities clustered around the city centre that would be subject to probably beneficial development to certain extents, there's not many avenues to get in past those without bulldozing through motorways. So where within the plan, or the developing ideas of the plan, are those barriers being considered in terms of that accessibility and permeability between those existing communities past the very significant motorway network we have which rings around the city into the city without quite literally having a very difficult conversation with national highways about bulldozing their motorways. And thirdly, a point I've raised, and again this is around these peripherals, and I think this goes to the deliverability of affordables in the language, but truly affordables, as I think obviously we have the aspiration to do, and I obviously know the work Councillor Lennox is working very heavily on, around how we develop our policies in those areas that donut the city centre, as it were, around that intensification to that gentle intensification. Because actually, unless we have got a robust policy network, policy setup that pushes directors to start looking at 4 or 5 story developments around that periphery of the city centre, that's going to put more pressure in the outer areas on the release of green space and potentially challenges to green, protected green space. So where within the development of the policy are we with that, and do we think we have levers where we can design policies that effectively push the developers in that donut area around the city centre to that gentle density? And if we don't think we have that at the moment, what do we need to do to get there? Otherwise, we're going to find it very hard to hit our housing targets once the city centre effectively fully develops.
Thank you. So I think in terms of the relationship between the transformational regeneration project and existing communities, those existing communities need to be at the heart of that, because the transformational regeneration needs to be a positive for them, because there's more investment, and we need to make sure that that investment brings local facilities that aren't maybe there at the moment, better connectivity, better green space, better green infrastructure, and better opportunities to actually access the city centre, because at the moment even though you may just be like a mile and a half from the city centre, it's often quite difficult to get in. So that's absolutely fundamental to that. I think the point to get across is this is a strategic plan, Leeds Local Plan 2040. It won't be able to design all of those sites from the off. So what it will do is it will set a framework for how that design should happen, and that design might come through further design codes, it might come through the supplementary planning documents or further master plans, and that's the right way to do it, because there might be some critical bit of key infrastructure that we just don't know yet whether we can fund or where that's coming from. But the plan will set out, well, what's the framework for actually providing a mixed use development within this part of the city centre, with a focus on the right scale and massing, the right connectivity, the right range of uses, the right local centre, the right green space, etc. And also whether it floods, and if it does, what's going to be done about it. So that's the level, I think, at which we need to be thinking about it. And I think in terms of that last point you made about that intensification, it'll be through that design code work with those clear parameters set out in Leeds Local Plan 2040 that we'll be able to sort of orchestrate the right new development and the right level of density.
Right. Coming back to the 42,000 homes, and if they're deliverable, and what Councillor Campbell said about, as well as having a start time, can we have an end time? Is that being taken up with government to see what we can do to, I mean, we've discussed it here before, about forcing developers to actually develop the land they've got rather than just sitting on it? Yeah. Is that...
I mean, I'll be honest, Councillor, we don't really have a lot of evidence to suggest that there is a lot of land banking within the city. I think homes are built and we've generally seen the same number of outlets within the city over recent years. I think the large number of permissions that we've granted, particularly in the outer areas like East of Wetherby, East Leeds Extension, they build out slower. So a lot of that 42,000 will be tied up with those significant sites. But I think once they start, that they will build out. I think the key thing is to get a range of different developers engaged in the city, and the way to do that is to get all parts of that kind of types of housing running at the same time. So we've not just got volume house builders building market, we've got developers building co-living, we've got developers building build to rent, we've got developers building new models around sort of family build to rent, as well as affordable housing at the same time. So I do think it's about trying to get a diversity of developments and to try to get clarity to investors in the city to be able to bring those forward, because we've developed, or we've delivered as a city just over 4,000 homes last year. That'll be the level at which we would need to keep developing if the draft housing target within the MPPF remains once it becomes final. So it's certainly a number of different levers to be pulling and working together.
Any other comments or questions from councillors? No? Go on then.
Just quickly in relation to start date, finish date. I appreciate what you're saying about some of their major housing developments, but we do see applications which we understand are not real applications but a speculative development with a view to add value to a site. And I think the end date would be the sort of thing that stopped having planning officers and plans panels sitting and discussing an application that was never going to happen.
think what might be worth doing is sharing some training that we've done elsewhere in the council on the current state of the market and the time frames involved in bringing a site to completion, the investment pre-planning, but also the potential delays post-planning. And I think at the moment a lot of post-planning delays are being caused by the Building Safety Act, as well as access to funding, which is often quite cyclical for a lot of investors and developers. So I think it would be quite helpful if this plans panel got the benefit of some of that information as well, because I think it might answer some of those questions.
Thanks, Martin. Anything else? Okay, we'll fetch this to an end. Thank you very much, Martin, for that presentation and support from the officers. So we just have the date and item 8, date and time of the next meeting, 28th of January. So, no doubt see you all before then, so I won't bother wishing you a Happy New Year. I have to give my apologies for that meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm away on holiday. Okay, thank you very much. So hopefully most of you will be able to stay for the workshop. I know Councillor Lamb's got to go at 3. Hopefully the students found that quite